Albert Einstein claimed as a name of all science that a minimum of basic principles should lead to a maximum of perceptive experiences. I would like to apply this formula from physical science to the science of the voice, and I would like to consider whether here too we are able to base the many different phenomena on a few simple principles. Actually, wouldn't it be of tremendous help to the teacher who is concerned with so many different vocal folds to have a minimum of basic principles to a maximum of perceptive experiences concerning the voice? That means, for example, breaks between registers, roughness or breathiness, singing out of tune, a limited vocal range, difficulties singing high or low notes, irregular or non-existent vibrato, poor breath management, nasality, hoarseness, vocal fatigue, peripheral muscular tension, and even nodules. Let us take a look at what science has to say to this. During the last century, voice science has been divided into many subcategories: anatomy, physiology, neurophysiology, neurolaryngology. From there, therapeutic practices have been developed that reflect diverse approaches and appear to satisfy multiple needs. However, if we compare vocal achievements before and after the intrusion of science into voice culture, the growing number of modern theories becomes very irritating, in particular as it is proportional to the decline in vocal culture. Now, this is a tremendous assumption, but if we listen to early recordings by Nelly Melba, Paul Plançon or Mattia Battistini and measure their virtuosity against that of today's singers, we are struck by the perfection of their legato line, the expressiveness of vibrato, the vowel purity, the rapidity and exactness of embellishments, and the non-interference of consonant articulation with tone production. Although these attributes are legitimate vocal potential of all singers, most of these skills in the present day have become a lost art. I shall refer here to the work of the internationally prominent American teacher Cornelius Lawrence Reid, 1911 until 2008. Through an intuition for the pedagogical importance and validity of traditional principles, he has developed working tools and concepts of practical use and, in his books and articles, links the pre-scientific empirical concepts of the bel canto era to modern scientific data. At the core of his teaching stands the importance of the vocal registers and their unification as solution to most pedagogic problems. Let's take a brief look at history. As early as the 14th century, the voice was understood to divide into two parts, more easily recognizable in the male voice, in a yodel. Each part was given a Latin name, vox integra and vox ficta. Voice culture was built on the empirical knowledge that these two separate parts had to be incorporated into a single entity. Why? Well, once a boy's voice had changed at puberty, it was noticed that it generally became harsh, aggressive, and unstable when singing high notes. Consequently, a means had to be found whereby those unpleasant sounds could be softened into something more musical. Just go to a football stadium and listen to the male choruses in there, and you know what I'm talking about. At the turn of the 16th into the 17th century, Caccini and Monteverdi used these concepts in Italian. Both insisted that the voce naturale, natural voice, or voce di petto, chest voice, had to be unified with the voci finte, the falsetto voices, in plural. Almost a century later, Tosi was the first singing teacher to publish technical details of voice training in 1723. He ascertained that when the union of chest voice and falsetto is not perfect, the voice will consist of several registers and consequently lose its beauty. His successors, Mancini and Manfredini, called registers the two integral parts of the voice and insisted, like Tosi, on the necessity for uniting them. The key to success in balancing the two registers is that the quality differences must be transformed if one wishes to smooth the passaggio separating the registers. In this transformation process, the chest register becomes less aggressive and the falsetto less false, or, as Reid preferred to put it, less incomplete. These admixtures have traditionally been referred to as mezzo petto and mezzo falso, meaning that the quality characteristics and dynamics of the chest register and the falsetto have been interchanged. As this process of development continues, these qualities are perceived as chest voice and head voice, eventually merging into the voce piena of full voice. These traditional terms did not result from precise physiological knowledge, but from the singer's subjective impressions based on sensations of vibrations. Actually, during the 18th century, teachers were not concerned with physiology and even had faulty concepts of it. But, as Reid put it, they did not know how the mechanism works, but they knew how to work the mechanism. During the later part of the 19th and throughout most of the 20th century, science attempted to replace traditional concepts of registers, arguing that they were neither clear nor objective. Only they threw out the baby with the bath. Modern registrational nomenclature consists of well over 100 names which are imaginative but lack the very precision and objectivity they were created to provide. Reid proposes a scientific reading of older texts to bridge conceptual confusions. He begins with the first mechanical definition of a vocal register provided by Manuel Garcia in 1841. By the word register, we understand a series of consecutive and homogeneous sounds from the bottom to the top, which are produced by the development of the same mechanical principle, and which by their nature differ essentially from another series of sounds equally consecutive and homogeneous, produced by another mechanical principle. And this is the key word that we are looking for. In order to find a base for the practical work with the voice, we need a mechanical principle. Garcia names the muscles of the larynx as the cause for registers. Like 20th century researchers as Douglas Stanley, Frederick Hussler or Johann Sundberg, Garcia thus already identified the importance of muscles as the agents that close and open the glottis, and that shape the vocal folds by stretching and lengthening or thickening and shortening them, thus refining concepts from the 18th century. Here we touch the very core of voice production. Voice is vibrating air. Its frequency, amplitude, and composition of overtones are defined by any chord's length, thickness, and tension. This acoustic law applies to the shape of the vocal folds, their length, mass, and tension. The composition of vocal sound waves is therefore directly defined by the action of the laryngeal muscles that shape the vocal lips. So we may conclude today that laryngeal muscles are responsible for vocal fold movement and, consequently, are the mechanical cause for voice production as well as the mechanical cause for the phenomenon called vocal register. The early masters, as we have seen, named basically two registers. Reid validates this concept by identifying two physiological configurations produced by two laryngeal muscle groups which interact, each of them shaping the vocal lips in a different way. Those two groups are the cricothyroids and the arytenoids, which shape the vocal folds in two opposed ways. First, an open glottis with long and thin vocal lips that vibrate on their outer edges is dominated by the action of the cricothyroids. It corresponds to the traditional falsetto. Second, a closed glottis with shorter and thicker lips is dominated by the action of an overly aggressive arytenoid system. It corresponds to the traditional chest register. But let us not forget that tone production is only a secondary function of the ensemble of cartilages, muscles, and mucosae that make up the vocal mechanism, their primary functions being that of deglutition and respiration, swallowing and breathing. It follows, therefore, that the larynx is not a vocal organ, which we find only in singing birds and where it is called a syrinx, but an organic system comprised of borrowed function. This is good because we could do nothing to change or better the functioning inside the closed system of an organ, while an open organic system may be better coordinated by exercise. The complex physiology of the larynx explains why the human voice is not a homogeneous entity by nature, but comprised of two groups of sounds, the natural voice and the falsetto. Let's take a look at the two mechanisms described by Reid. In the first one, the action of the cricothyroid muscles on the vocal folds is dominant. They tilt the thyroid cartilage forward and downward and lengthen and thin the vocal lips. The integration of this mechanism into the natural voice is critical, since its function is to regulate pitch. However, their primary and intrinsically natural function is to participate in the act of swallowing. The tilting action is designed to grab the bolus or the saliva. It is accompanied by a rising larynx and by contraction of the lower constrictor muscles of the throat. Since the cricothyroids and the lower constrictor muscles are both innervated by the external branch of the superior laryngeal nerve, and since their fibers cross at the point of their attachment to the thyroid cartilage, they always act together. As a result, the rising, closing and tilting movements of the larynx, undesirable in singing, make the integration of the cricothyroids, and therefore of the falsetto, an exceedingly difficult task. The second mechanism consists of the arytenoid muscles. Their primary function is to open and close the glottis during respiration. They also, by tensing, assist in stabilizing the torso as effort is expended, as well as resisting airflow in order to evacuate particles while coughing. Neurophysiology offers conclusive proof of the two-register theory. The two muscular systems that shape the vocal folds are innervated by two independent branches of the 10th cranial or vagus nerve. The independent branches of the vagus nerve allow for the possibility of stimulating the muscles of the larynx to work either independently or together. Autonomous innervations confirm the neurological basis for two and only two registers. Consequently, if the ear distinguishes between more than two series of consecutive and homogeneous sounds, as Garcia put it, then these derive from two basic mechanisms referred to as chest register and falsetto. In ascending the scale, the muscles must pass from the dominant action of one mechanism, while its opposing system braces, to a reversal of this activity where the bracing mechanism tenses more actively while the formerly more dominant mechanism assumes in its turn a bracing mode. To succeed in this without breaks in the voice, the two muscular systems engaged are transformed by art into becoming mutual antagonists operative within the confines of an organic system. All tones of the scale will then not have the same quality. Similar to the strings of a violin, thicker vocal folds produce a more robust sound than those that are thinner. Thus, ascending the vocal scale is like passing from one shade of color into another. By mixing two primary colors, yellow and blue, we obtain innumerable shades of green. In principle, they compare to the many timbres of sound potentially capable of being produced by the vocal mechanism. A functionally trained ear is quick to recognize the extent to which each mechanism participates in any tone. Whether more aggressive or mellow, more chest or falsetto dominated, produced by more arytenoid or cricothyroid action. Many different ways to describe the functional shifts in the balance between the two basic register mechanisms. What we face now is the question of the pedagogical implication of all this. How does it apply to the various faults found to exist with most students? 18th century authorities were thoroughly aware of the possibility of stimulating independent action causing a separation of the falsetto and the chest voice, even though they possessed no knowledge of the anatomical causes accounting for this separation. Mancini writes in 1777 that the way to cultivate the voice is always to weaken a portion of the voice which is strong and to strengthen another portion which by nature is weak. The only problem is in view of the fact that the muscles engaged are involuntary, because the 10th cranial nerve is part of the autonomous system. So how do we gain control over such muscles? After centuries of empirical research, the bel canto masters knew that attempting to act upon the vocal mechanism was not a feasible alternative. They discovered that external influences had to be relied on. By controlling the environment, they learned to control the very core of the vocal mechanism. Thus, vocal exercises represent an environmental control system by which it becomes possible to isolate, develop, and integrate the two registers. But how do we stimulate one register and not the other one? We need appropriate tools to foster such a development. Actually, one may change the pitch either by thickening and shortening the vocal folds or by lengthening and thinning them. Both dimensional settings produce the same pitch, but possess different quality characteristics. The former will be more robust, dramatic, rough, strong, masculine, and bright. Here the folds will be shorter and thicker and vibrate throughout their entire mass, the arytenoids assuming a greater portion of tension. The tonal product, to use traditional terminology, will be chest voice dominated. Contrariwise, when the vocal folds are longer, thinner, and vibrating along their outer edges, the tone quality will appear to be more sweet, lyrical, round, dark, and feminine. This adjustment involves a more dynamic participation of the cricothyroids, which results in a falsetto-dominated sound. A voice functions well and becomes expressive when the vocal lips adapt their vibrational patterns to varying thicknesses and lengths for each tone of the vocal range. Let us recall again that the three acoustic components of sound are pitch, intensity, and vowel. These three components influence the length, thickness, and tension of the vocal folds, which in turn are defined by the action of the cricothyroids and arytenoids, tensors of the vocal folds. The operational tools necessary in order to separate, combine, or strengthen one or both of these muscle systems are particular combinations of pitch, intensity, and vowel. Bel canto masters have centered their attention on the range of a register, giving the pitch. They spoke of the different degrees of intensity with which vocal exercises are sung, and all the 18th century authorities emphasized the significant role played by the third component, vowel or tonal purity. So the three tonal elements can be combined in order to cultivate technical skills in singing. How? Just a few examples. By singing a solid forte in a low pitch range on the vowel a or ä, arytenoid tension will be optimized, producing an aggressive chest register. By singing a very soft woo sound, the quality to emerge will be recognized as a falsetto. When the a vowel is too open, the vocal lips are overly thick, a useful exercise to thin and lengthen the vocal lips is to precede the a vowel with an oo vowel, as oo instead of ah, retaining the oo quality while singing the a and maintaining a pure legato in passing from the first vowel to the second. The a will then reflect the influence of the head voice, lose the negative properties associated with its openness, and become better defined. Octave jumps on the vowel a serve to open the throat and pave the way for a free entry into the head voice range. This reverses the natural tendency of the cricothyroids to constrict the throat. Descending arpeggios sung on the oo-ah combination help to establish the dominance of head voice tone qualities throughout the entire pitch range. The vowels e and e are qualities that tend to constrict the throat. Singing an ascending arpeggio with a strong rhythmic elan on an a vowel with the mouth wide open and the head tilted comfortably back. Mold an e on an e vowel out of the tone quality established by the singing of the a vowel. Then descend on the e or the e to the tonic. Both the e and the e vowel shared their constrictive propensities. Choice of an appropriate action depends on individual needs. The ultimate purpose of all exercises is to create a homogeneity of quality throughout the entire vocal range. This requires a considerable amount of experience and study. Each vocal exercise must be chosen to satisfy several criteria: which one, when, how, and why. Successful cultivation of technical skills must take into account problems related to register development and integration, as well as the level of muscular tonus. So we may conclude: the principles of traditional voice teaching can be proven scientifically. The vocal folds are brought under tension by two opposed muscle systems. The distribution of tension between them determines the quality of the tonal product. To change that quality, it is necessary to stimulate the laryngeal muscular systems into different types of coordinate activity. Once this coordination has become more efficient, the tonal product will reflect a condition where the two register mechanisms, traditionally called the chest register and the falsetto, function as a unified and balanced entity. Many vocal problems may be solved by the correct employment of the principles associated with register mechanics, as shown by historic evidence and by Reid's work, thus showing that Einstein's dictum, many phenomena, few principles, may be fulfilled in our domain here. Cornelius Lorenz Reid has not only rediscovered traditional principles, he has established the importance of functional listening as a foundation for studying and cultivating the voice. He reintroduced an oral tradition whereby empirical observation will, once again, contribute a wealth of practical knowledge relating to the development of the singing voice. Thank you.